We're getting out of that Psalm 89 and we're headed to Psalm 101. For those of you who are like, we've been in the Psalms for a really, really long time, and you're thinking, are we ever going to get out of the Psalms, or are we still just going to keep going and going and going? You may have a surprise to come here shortly in the next couple months. We may be moving somewhere in the New Testament. So that's just a heads up. If you're thinking, I don't know how much more of the Psalms I can take, which is a real thing, so that's okay with me. They're good, but it's like, I got it, there's so many other books. Okay, so we're going to keep going with the Psalms, but just know there's light at the end of the tunnel. So we're in Psalm 101, and here's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today, which is, what does it look like to actually follow Christ? What does it look like to follow the King? In the Old Testament, there was this pattern where God gives the law, and the king receives the law, and then the king follows the law, or at least that's the way it was supposed to go. And then, ideally, the king follows the law, and then the people follow the king. So the pattern is supposed to be the people of God follow the king whom God has anointed for them, and by following the king, they're following in the footsteps of God. They're following His law, His statutes, His righteousness. That's how it was supposed to go. In this psalm that we see today, it's a psalm by David, and this is a shining moment for David, at least this psalm. I mean, if David actually did the things that he says he's going to do in this psalm, I mean, he would be one of the best kings that Israel ever had. Now, I don't know how well he did these things or how long this lasted. I don't know at what point in David's kingship he decided to make these commitments or try to do these things. What I do know is that this is how the king was supposed to act. These are the things the king was supposed to do. These were the ways that he was supposed to lead the kingdom. Now, we don't see it in this psalm. We talked about it a whole lot in Psalm 89. There's this covenant that you guys have heard me mention like 20 times. That's the Davidic covenant that God made with David, the king. And he said there would be this king that would come, and this king would rule on the throne of David forever. And we talked about intensely how that king is Jesus and couldn't be anybody else besides him. So here's what I want to do today. If David is doing these things, acting as he's supposed to as a king, and we know that David is only a shadow of what Jesus was. We know that Jesus fulfilled all the things that David was supposed to fulfill. We know that he was the one who fulfilled that covenant. Then, if we look at the things that David says at the beginning of this psalm about what he's going to do with his own life, then we can get behind what David's doing and, in a sense, follow the king, which is what we're supposed to be doing as a people of God. So what I want to do is I want to look at the first 4 verses. You'll notice in Psalm 101 that it kind of flips halfway through. The first 4 verses are basically talking about what David's going to do himself, what he's going to do on the inside. And we'll read those first 4 verses. The second half of the psalm we're not going to get to. The second half of the psalm is what David's going to do with the kingdom. So verse 5 through 8 is what David's going to do to transform the kingdom, but verse 1 through 4 is what David's going to do to transform himself. So that's what we're looking at today, which is answering this question, what does it look like to follow the king? Now for us, the king is Jesus. For David, it was him. The people were following him. This poses sort of an interesting question before we even start here. It's not just how are you going to follow the king? Are you going to do well in how you follow him? The question at the very front end is Jesus even king? I mean, do you buy into the fact that he is the promised Davidic king? Because if you don't buy into that, to be honest, the first 4 verses of this psalm, it won't mean much to you. Because it's just how some guy decided he wanted to live, and that's great for him, but it doesn't mean much for us. Unless Jesus is the king. Because if he's the king, and David's modeling that for us, then we have a reason to try to transform our lives to look a little bit like this. So, question number 1 is Jesus the king? of your life. Because if we never get past that, then we can't get to any of this. And if you're not there yet, that's fine. I get that. If you're not there yet to where you're like, Jesus, I'm not sure if he's the king, I still want you to pay attention to what we're going to say here. There's a dialogue in Luke chapter 14 that talks about where Jesus is talking to a group of people. And he says this, whoever does not bear his own cross cannot be my disciple. And then he tells two parables with the theme of counting the cost of discipleship. If you're not to that point where you're thinking, yeah, Jesus is king, I believe that, I want to trust that, I want to live like that, then my encouragement to you is listen to what we're talking about for the next 4 verses and count the cost. Consider if this kind of life is worth living to follow a guy named Jesus who lived a couple thousand years ago. Because you're going to want to decide whether he means enough to you before you decide to live like this. So if that's where you're at, I just want you to listen carefully and consider what it looks like or what it should look like to follow Christ. If you're beyond that, then you're going to ask yourself this question, are we following him well? And in order to answer that, I came up with this statement. It's a little long, so I put it on PowerPoint for you because I knew if I said it out loud, people would be like, well, that's a lot. I crafted it from the first 4 verses of this psalm. So we're going to walk through and we're going to unpack how I built this, but I'll read it to you just on the front end. This is what it should look like, according to this psalm, to follow after the King, which we know to be Jesus. With your gifts, live continual and intentional, live with continual and intentional integrity, filtering what you see, hating, swerving, and rebellious action, and turning from perversion. And to summarize kind of all of it, it's this idea of making evil foreign. So we're just going to walk through these first 4 verses. We're going to unpack that statement that I made there. So Psalm 101, starting in verse 1. It says, a psalm of David. I will sing of the steadfast love and justice to you, O Lord. I will make music. Okay. Some of you are like, doggone it, I'm not very good at music. And singing, most people don't want to hear me sing. I can relate. Here's what I think David's doing. If you read any of the Psalms, you'll see David's name plastered on a whole lot of them. Which means David was pretty good at music. If you read the stories of David in 1 Samuel, you'll realize that King Saul, before David, brought David into his court to play him music. And it says that when he played him music, Saul's heart was quieted. So there was something about David's voice, something about the way he played music, something about David. He just had a talent, a gift with music. So it makes sense then that he would say something like, I will sing of steadfast love and justice to you, Lord. I will make music. That's wonderful. Here's what that should translate to you. What are your gifts? What are your talents? David's gift was music. We're not all gifted at music. That's fine. What's your gift? What's your talent? Are you using it to worship God? The first one here, with your gifts. Your gift might be serving, might be organizing, you might be good with numbers. You might be good critical thinker. You might be good teaching. Maybe you can preach and you want to come tell me and we need to share a little bit of this stage. Maybe you're good at listening. Or maybe you're prophetically gifted. Not the Old Testament, thus saith the Lord kind, but the New Testament kind. What is your gift? You want to follow in the way after the King, you're going to have to use your gifts, whatever it is. And we need all of them. The church needs all of them. And it can't function without all of them. It does function without all of them, unfortunately, but like a crippled person walking around because people don't believe they have anything to offer. But you do. So What is your gift? David was singing, so he's like, I'm going to sing because I'm good at singing. Great. Some of you need to spend some time figuring out, what am I gifted at? If you see that somebody's gifted at something, tell them. It is so much easier for someone else to see it than it is for you to see it. I remember I had a pastor one time at the church I was going to. I was studying at church for school, and he comes up to me and he says, "You're a learner." And I was like, "What? I hate school." And he goes, "No, serious. I mean," he's like, I've seen you just eat up everything." And I was like, "Well, I don't know if I buy it, but I'll think about it." It's so much easier for you to see things in other people than it is for them to see it themselves. So if you see somebody else's gift, tell them. Help them out. Help them figure out how to worship God with their gifts. Let's go to verse 2. "I will ponder the way that is blameless. Oh, when will you come to me?" Okay. I will ponder. Doesn't come out in the English, but in the Hebrew, that's a continual verb, meaning it's continuous action. So that's where the continual comes from. Okay, living with continual. And then pondering, that's thinking about, that's thought, that's intention. That's spending time in thought before you ever get to doing the action. Spending time in thought thinking, how can I better follow God? How can I better walk in his ways? David just simply says, I'm going to spend time thinking about it. It's continual and intentional thought. Second half of that verse says, "I will walk with integrity of heart within my house." Again, walking, continual verb. "I will walk with integrity of heart within my house." Okay, so that's the integrity part. We need to talk a little bit about heart. Because our idea and understanding of heart is almost all and entirely emotions in our culture today. We talk about heart, and most people just think, oh, those feel-good emotions or those touchy-feely, like, heart kind of stuff, and that's kind of weird. Okay. You need to understand that in the Old Testament, the heart is almost entirely encompassing of the entire person. I want to read to you, we're not going to go to all these verses because there's a ton of them, but I want to read to you just how comprehensive the heart is in the Bible. This is how Old Testament thought of the idea of heart. And here's the reason why. It's because they had really no concept of the brain. They didn't really understand what that was up there. They didn't have even a word for brain. Okay, so they used the heart for just about everything. They used the heart for different things. They used the heart for the physical. Okay, they did believe it was an organ inside your chest that helped you sustain life. There's verses like, when it's talking about war, so-and-so pierced him in the chest through the heart. Okay, so we know that they knew that it was an organ and it was inside your body. They knew it was physical. Okay, that's not much different from us. Okay, they also thought that the heart was the center of intellectual activity. You think with your heart. You know with your heart, Deuteronomy 8:5, thoughts were held in the heart, Deuteronomy 15:9. You understand with the heart, wisdom dwells in the heart, discernment comes from the heart. Memories are kept in the heart. So there's this aspect of intellectual activity that encompasses also this description of the heart. So when David says, I will walk with integrity of heart, he's not just meaning I'm going to take care of my physical body. Okay, he's not just meaning I'm going to follow God with my thoughts, my intellectual activity. He's also meaning emotions. Pain is held in the heart. The Bible describes having a broken heart, parallels it with sadness. You have hate in your heart in Leviticus 19. Your heart can melt or be discouraged in Deuteronomy 1. You fear in the heart. There's a description of men in Isaiah chapter 7 who are about to go to war and they are faint of heart. And then there's a description of God where the psalmist prays that God would unite his heart with the fear of God. You can feel depression and sorrow in your heart, Psalm 13. Tenderness and humility are in the heart. In 2 Chronicles 34, joy, happiness are described as being good of heart. So it's your center of your intellectual activity. It's your physical body. It's also where your emotions lie. It also is where will stems from. Choices, desires. In 1 Chronicles 22, David had it in his heart to build a temple. It's what he wanted to do. And that's the description over and over and over. David had it in his heart. He had it in his heart. Psalm 37:4, we have desires of the heart. Nathan says to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, whatever is in your heart, go and do it. Meaning whatever it is that you want to do, you go and do that. Ezra had his heart set on studying the law in Ezra chapter 7. So here's what I want you to see. Oh, there's more. Jeez. Source of evil, deceit is in the heart. Arrogance and pride come from the heart in Isaiah chapter 9. Here's what I want you to see. And the point of why it makes a big deal that David makes a statement that says, I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. He's not just talking about his emotions. He's not just talking about his physical being. He's talking about everything. The heart in the Old Testament was the mind. It was the heart. It was the desires. It was the will. It was the emotions. It was everything. Here's a summary verse from Proverbs 4:23. It says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So you understand why, if your heart in the Old Testament, that word comes with everything, why then it's the wellspring of life. So walking in integrity is why I put the word live with continual and intentional integrity. Because it's not just feeling with integrity, it's not just thinking with integrity, it's not just physically living with integrity, it's all of those. And your desires. Living with integrity. Has anybody figured out this is a pretty high standard yet? I mean, this is kind of through the roof. Like David's kind of setting up, and that's why I said at the beginning, I'm not sure how much of this David actually worked out in his own life and for how long he did this, because this is a crazy high standard. I'm only 2 verses in. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, within my house. Doggone it. I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. Okay, for the king, that's everything. Okay, this is not just like within my home, within my family. He's the king. And his house is a kingdom. So not only do we have all of David, and all of David personally that he thinks and feels and does with his life, that he desires with his life, but we have all of the things that David also touches. I'm going to walk with integrity in all that stuff too. Your house is not necessarily just your family. Your house could be your possessions. Your house could be your work. Your house is your time. God gives you breath in your lungs, which means everything that you do is part of your kingdom. It's part of your house. It could be your wife, could be your husband, could be your family. Maybe it's a business. It doesn't matter what the house is for you. Bottom line is God's given you something to have responsibility over, even if it's simply the breath in your lungs. You have responsibility over something. And it should be walked with in integrity. Let's go to verse 3. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. living following the King, living following Christ means filtering what you see with your eyes. That one's pretty straightforward. Worthlessness could also be translated ruin or destruction. Many people can explain away worthlessness. Well, it's not all worthless, this TV show that I'm watching. Some of it's kind of good. I get some good principles from it. I know it's a little bit crazy, but it's not all bad, right? And we can kind of explain it away. Ruin or destruction. I will not set before my eyes anything that is ruin or might cause destruction to me. A little bit harder to explain away. It means what you watch on television. It means what you watch on your computer. It means what you watch on your phone. It means the movies that you watch. This is an interesting one I just thought of last night. It means what you read with your eyes. Not a physical picture, but I know some people who would say that pornography is absolutely terrible, and yet they will eat up romance novels. Just devour them. Well, there's no picture. Reading with your eyes. And yeah, if you have any sort of imagination, you get there real quick. I will not set before my eyes anything worthless. It's filtering what you see. I will hate the work of those who fall away, second half of verse 3. It shall not cling to me. Okay, this is an interesting thing because it's kind of a weird translation here. It's good. I will hate the work of those who fall away. It's literally translated, I hate the doing of swerving deeds. So you can see how they would translate it then, falling away, because if you're trying to follow the King and the King's walking straight, and you're walking straight and then you're swerving. And you're walking straight and then you're swerving. And they describe it as falling away. Well, that makes sense. If you're swerving off the path, then you're falling away. And he's literally saying, I'm going to hate these things. Listen to the next phrase, it shall not cling to me. A lot of people feel like sin clings to them. I can't get rid of it. I can't throw it off. Man, I've been struggling with this for years. And it's just like it's got its dirty little fingers just wrapped around me and it won't go away. A lot of Christians live feeling like sin clings to me. This or that, we all got our struggles. David's solution is, I hate the doing of swerving deeds. Now, you're going to have to figure out or decide what the best reason is for you to hate sin. You're going to have to figure out what the best reason is for you to say, I hate doing that thing that I used to love doing. Here's some examples. Maybe you don't like swerving deeds because you don't like the consequences. That's motivation enough. Maybe you hate apologizing. Maybe you're just like, it is so uncomfortable for me to stand face to face with somebody and say, I screwed up, I did wrong. Will you forgive me? And that's just so uncomfortable for you that you're like, I would rather not have to do that. I'm going to hate doing evil things because I really don't like doing that. Maybe you hate hurting people. And if you're like me, you've come to the realization that when you swerve to the right or swerve to the left, a little gossip, a little slander, a little lying, that sin bleeds over. And the ones who it bleeds over to first is the people you say you love the most. It's one thing to come to the realization that you can't keep sin contained. It's another thing to realize that, man, it gets the people that I say I love the most first because they're the closest to me. And it hits them the hardest. Maybe that's your reason for hating sin. Maybe you really have a desire to please God. And there's something built inside of you that's like, man, I just really want to be pleasing to him, and I know that when I do these things, swerve to the right, swerve to the left, I'm just not pleasing to him. And that's your motivation. I don't know what it is. You're going to have to find your reason to hate sin. Because that's the way to keep it from clinging to you. You want to brush things off, you want to get rid of them out of your life, you got to learn to start hating them, but you got to have a good reason. Because it's going to take it happening again and again and again to get rid of those things. It's hating, swerving, and rebellious action. Go to verse 4. A perverse heart shall be far from me. It's the idea of turning away. He's just simply saying, I'm not going to be anywhere close to that. You could translate perverse, twisted, which makes it a little bit closer to home, because oftentimes what we struggle with is not the crazy, ridiculous stuff. A lot of us change from doing good things in our life to all of a sudden just being a crazy maniac who doesn't do anything right and makes a whole bunch of bad decisions. Most of the time we're not going from all the way over here to all the way over here. Most of the time the twist is like this. And David's saying, that's not even an option. And this right here, this twist, also not an option. Because I know what happens when the twist keeps coming. And eventually I'm farther off base than I thought I was. It's the turning away from perversion. Last half of verse 4 says, I will know nothing of evil. It's literally making evil foreign. I will know nothing of it. It's the difference between getting to a point in your walk with God where you're sitting there saying, man, I don't do that anymore, but in a second I could be right back there. I mean, just give me the opportunity and make one bad, and I'm off a cliff. Like I slip and 40-foot drop, and I'm screwed. If a difference of that versus, I don't even know what it looks like to be over there close to the edge. I'm not even sure what's on the other side of that cliff. I don't even know how far the drop is because I'm so far back from the edge. It's literally this process of making evil a foreign thing, and doggone it, that takes time. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. It's kind of a summary statement, making evil foreign. You never get completely to that point in this life, but it's something to work towards. With your gifts, live with continual and intentional integrity, filtering what you see, hating, swerving, and rebellious action, and turning from perversion, making evil foreign. Now, some of you are looking at that going, but some of those are easy for me. I mean, not so bad. I mean, I got some of those in the back. Some of you know what your gifts are. You're like, yeah, I use my gifts. That's great. Some people in the room are like, I have no idea what I'm gifted at. And I'm pretty good at being continual and intentional, and I try to filter what I see, and I'm doing the best I can to make, but I don't have a clue what my gifts are. What is it on the list that you're like, that I have, that I'm good at, that I have figured out? It should give you some encouragement. I hope you're not looking at the list and going, well, I don't do none of that stuff. If that's, then you got some work to do, that's fine. I'm hoping you at least look at the list and you have some encouragement to say, well, I do a couple of those pretty good. Whichever one you're looking at the list and saying, I do that pretty good. In fact, I think I do that really well. That's good, because there's someone else sitting in the room who doesn't do it well, who needs your help. Figuring it out. Doing it well. Which one do you not do well? Or two, or three? It's just something to work on. It's not something that you need to sit there and go, oh, I'm such a horrible person. I can't believe I'm not set up to this standard. No, the standard is crazy. It's good because we know where we're supposed to be headed. But none of us are here. So being able to identify is just something to work on. It's just something to work towards. It's a goal. It's something for 2018 to say, you know what? I want to work on being more intentional. I'm pretty good with continual. But to be honest, I don't really think about what's the best way to follow God. I just kind of do some stuff, and if it doesn't work, I change it. And if it does work, I keep doing it, and I'm pretty good with that. But I never actually sat and thought about it. What would it look like for me to follow more after Christ in my life? It's just something to work on as you walk out your Christian walk, following the King. If there's something on here that you're really just like, I have been trying to get that and I just cannot, you may need to ask for help. You may need to find somebody else who's close to you and say, look, I figured out what this thing is that I can't do, and I need help. And that's okay too. That's why there's a community. That's why we have each other. None of us can do this by ourselves. One last point, and then we'll talk about communion for a couple minutes. In the Old Testament, I love the heart of David. David was just like, I'm just going to do this stuff, and it's going to be great. And he's like gung-ho, and that's really great. I love David's heart in all this. And I would be curious to know how much of this he actually accomplished. But David was trying to be the king who everybody else was supposed to follow. We're not the king. Okay, Jesus is the king. So don't worry about, I have to do this so other people follow me. No, Christ is the king. You do this following him, and then hopefully other people will do it following you. So take that burden off your shoulders. Know that you're not the king. You're not David. Jesus is the king. You're simply trying to follow him. And then take this burden off your shoulders too. There is a warning that Paul gives to the Galatian church when they're trying to live more like Christ. There's a warning that he provides to them, and he provides it in somewhat of an upset manner. I don't know if you've read the book of Galatians, but he's not very happy with the Galatian church. Okay, I'm not unhappy or upset with you guys, but I do want you to heed the warning that he gives to them. Okay, listen to this. This is from Galatians 3:3. He says, "Are you so foolish? Having begun in the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh?" And if you're anything like me, God has used this passage, this verse for me to realign my thinking that as I'm trying to accomplish these things in my life, I'm not working alone. In fact, if you're trying to accomplish these things in your life, working apart from the Holy Spirit, you'll fail. Because these things are hard. And there's a moment where you just got to simply say, you know what? I need the Spirit of God. I need the Spirit of God to accomplish these things. If you're trying to accomplish these things in the flesh, it won't work. So I want you to heed the warning that Paul gives to the Galatian church. You do not have to do this alone. There is a Spirit that God has given his believers, those who are following him as king, to say, I'm not leaving you alone. You don't have to do this by yourself. You have power to do these things because God's indwelling you. That's where your power comes from. Let's talk about communion real quick. We just spent a whole lot of time talking about following in the footsteps of the King. That this was the pattern that the Old Testament set up for us, for the people of God, and that it makes great sense that there would be a guy named Jesus who would come, who would have a wooden post nailed to his cross that says, King of the Jews. Very clearly for all the world to see, he is the king. Now, they did it hypocritically and ironically, and yet they were right. And he's not only the king of the Jews, Paul tells us, but the mystery, the wonderful mystery, is that he's the king of the Gentiles as well, which is you and me, unless you're from Jewish descent. And I don't see Josiah in here, so that means we probably don't have any Jews. Okay, we've been talking about following the king. Look, communion is following the king. Listen to Jesus institute this meal. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took the bread. This is from Matthew 26. And after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." This is literally following in the footsteps of the king. Instituted by God, Jesus, him saying, "Look, I want you to do this." So, as we follow in this Old Testament pattern of trying to be transformed to look more like Christ, this is part of it. This is part of following in the footsteps of the king, the real king. That being said, this is for people who are following the king. This is not for everybody. This is something that Christians do to follow their king. Okay, if you haven't made it to that point yet where you're thinking, "Jesus, I want him to be my king and the king," recognizing that, then I encourage you either to make that decision or just to remain where you are. Nobody's watching you. This is time for us to connect with God and to spend some time in communion with him. So you feel free just to stay in your seat or pray to God and say, "Maybe I want you to be my king." And if that's the case, then you can do that and feel free to come up after you've had that conversation with him. So I want you to take a moment to realize that this is an obedience thing. We do this to follow in the footsteps of the king. I'll pray to start you off. Father, thanks for your son. God, thanks that you've given us the Spirit living inside of us so that as we try to walk after you and look more like you, we actually have some power to do it. God, I pray that you would use the people in the room who have great strength, who have come a long way in following you to teach others, to teach the rest of us what it's like to live for you, God. I pray that you would give the people who are struggling in the room a humility to ask for help. Would you show us who we are in you? Would you make us better followers of you, Father?